Good morning everyone. Tara, basa na tayo ng ating sariling libro guys. Sariling history book. Kapwa ka Pilipino, magbasa na tayo. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Today is 06 April 2023. History of the Filipino People, Part 6, The Third Republic. Topic number 29, the cultural and social scene. Nandito tayo sa paragraph, Beginnings of a New Elite. Basa. Beginnings of a new elite. The trust made by the new bourgeoisie during the Japanese occupation into the social vacuum continues up to the present and promises to develop class of new elite. The fall of the old agrarian aristocracy has been caused partly by the development of commerce and industry. Aggressive and to a certain extent, imaginative men of the lower and middle classes have gone and are still going into commerce and industry with a perseverance never before witnessed. This group of men, or at least many of them, does not depend on the old way of thinking that one's prestige depends on one's aristocratic family background. The prestige they have built or are building depends on the concentration of wealth and power in their hands. These dimensions, wealth and power, have succeeded in pushing into the background the aristocratic families whose prestige lay in the position of haciendas, the symbol of wealth and power from the Spanish times to the outbreak of the Second World War. The abrupt changes in the economics of wealth and power occasioned by the last war caught the members of the landed aristocracy flat-footed and consequently threw them out of gear. A few are adapting themselves to the demands of the new economics, but the majority, either because they could not reconcile themselves to the rise of the new rich or because of lack of initiative, have been relegated to the background. With the decay of the landed families, the aristocratic Spanish title Don, which precedes a name to denote the high class to which a man belongs, has become a misnomer. Yeah, nung araw guys, meron tayong Don, Donya, yung mga ganun. Pag mayaman ka. It is used sparingly and only by those who, having fallen under the influence of the feudalistic features of the Spanish period, have a hard time shaking off the nomenclature from their minds. Alta sociedad, or high society, is now mostly composed of traders, businessmen, and industrialists, and their daughters and wives who spend most of their time in clubs. During the pre-war years, only daughters and sons of the landed aristocracy could become members of exclusive clubs. Today, membership in such clubs is open to those who, irrespective of family origins and backgrounds, have the money to throw away. Thus, the new economics has partially, if not completely, democratized Filipino society. While the new bourgeoisie are acquiring wealth, they are at the same time trying to win political power. This attempt at political consolidation is being done indirectly through political puppets, politicians who have risen from the lower and middle class and who are in need of padrinos or sponsors to maintain their positions in the political institution. This is not new, for even during the heyday of the landed aristocracy, political puppets were common. The only change noted is in the puppet politicians' shift of allegiance from the aristocracy to the new bourgeoisie. It is the duty of the puppet politician to protect and to enhance the interest of his padrino or the class to which the latter belongs. Failure to do so means withdrawal of the padrino's support and consequently disaster for the politician. Quite recently, or since the elections of 1965, quite a number of new millionaires who have risen from below were elected to the Senate and the House of Representatives. It would be naive to suppose that they would not use their millions to protect and advance their business interests. Thus, Congress is becoming the paradise of plutocrats. Labor, meanwhile, is unrepresented, although many lawmakers make it a point to deliver speeches praising deliberate and making wild promises has not so far led to the determination of national command decisions, although in new instances it may have had. The reason is that the process of consultation is still going on and has not yet reached the point where the new bourgeoisie are too strongly entrenched for any group to oppose. The point will be reached when industrialization will have been fully developed and when, as a consequence, huge corporations or combinations will have risen to control or dictate the direction of the national economy and politics. Student power, the phenomenon of contemporary history which has been appearing on many university and college campuses all over the world, is the student demonstration. Demonstrations were not unknown in Manila long before the Second World War for the students of the University of the Philippines, described by intelligence agencies as the hotbed of radicalism, held demonstrations against the actuations of those in power. Thus, in the early 1930s, the students of the university, led by Wenceslao Q. Binzons, who was to become delegate to the Constitutional Convention 1934, assemblyman and governor of his native Camarines Norte, held a huge demonstration before the Legislative Building, the present Congress Building, to protest a rider in a bill providing for increases in the salaries of the legislators. Peaceful and orderly demonstration aroused public opinion against the inclusion of a rider in what appeared to be a harmless bill, and Senate President Manuel L. Quezon, reading the protest correctly, withdrew the offensive rider from the bill. The immediate post-war years were years of conformism, of indifference, even when there was hardly a student voice raised against special relations with the United States or against the rampant drought in corruption or against the abuses of those in power. It was a period of readjustment after 3 years of suffering and hunger, and the students concerned with how to continue their studies, which were temporarily halted during the Japanese occupation, did not realize or refuse to realize the magnitude of the national problems confronting the people. It was not until the late 1950s that the Filipino students finally awakened to the dynamics of society and realized that it was their duty, no less than their elders, to commit themselves to the cultural questions vexing the leaders of the nation. Surprisingly, the first stirrings of the awakened social conscience were manifested in protests against the actuations of certain Americans who had not stopped believing that the Philippines was still a colony of the United States. But the protests, though clear, were not loud enough to attract nationwide attention. It was in the early 1960s that the students found the courage and the power to unite and to hold mass rallies and demonstrations, not only against certain actuations of the Americans, but also against the behavior of some leaders in the government who the students felt were not possessed of enough manliness to stand up to American importunities. By the second half of the 1960s, the students had already decided to have a say in national affairs and in the affairs of their universities, colleges, and even their churches. Compared with the students in Western countries and even in Japan, those in the Philippines were polite. There had been a case in which a mediocre professor or a simpering school administrator was stoned. There had not been any manhandling of lazy or arrogant instructor. There had not been any bloody affair that characterized some students' demonstrations in Europe, the United States, Latin America, and Japan, and there had not been any battle with the police constabulary constabulary, no matter how abusive this may have been. The years from 1965 to 1972 witnessed the holding of massive student rallies, strikes, and demonstrations aimed at compelling those in authority to give in to their legitimate demands. These demands may be classified into number 1, those relating to national and international problems in which the Philippines was involved, number 2, those dealing with school administration, and number 3, those dealing with reforms in the Catholic Church in the country. The growth of student power may be ascribed to, number one, the increasing student awareness that reforms in the social, political, and economic spheres of the country can be hastened by their commitment to those ideas which would restructure society in such a way as to make it more egalitarian. Number two, the inadequacy of those in power to come to grips with realities and the refusal or reluctance to share the responsibility in national development with the young, whose realism is infused with the idealism of youth. Number three, the continuing crisis in national life brought about by graft and corruption in high and low places and by the cynical attitude of those who continually speak about virtues and patriotism but subvert society by dishonest dealings and by going into smuggling. And number four, the failure of the older generation to appreciate the shift in the basis of the stable society of which the student form a significant segment, that the students meant to hold on their newfound power is amply demonstrated by their insistence in forcing the authorities and in one instant the President of the Philippines to accept their demands. Okay, hanggang dito na lang muna tayo guys. Focus na yung topic number 30 under martial law. Ang panahon na to ni President Marcos Sr. So, ilagay ko lang dito for 7 April 2023. Bye everyone. God bless.